Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Rules. I don't know if you are aware that the Mudroom has been going on for 6 years. It was started by, or it was a brainchild of a former board member, Emily Ridgway, who since has moved to Colorado, but I think we should give her a round of applause, and I will send her. Anyway, I am Bente Torjussen, and I'm already feeling that I'm breaking the rules because I retired almost 3 years ago. And here I am. And, well, it's sort of breaking the rules. But it is only for a short period of time. I am Casey Carpenter, a member of the Mudroom committee, will introduce each of the storytellers and also give thanks to the musicians and the food vendors and everyone else who have worked so hard to make this beautiful evening come together. Thank you so much for being here. Come back again and again.
Good evening, everyone. As Bente said, my name is Casey Carpenter, and I am the newest member of the Mudroom board. I just realized, sitting with Judith over there, I moved here a year ago to the date. Thank you. I moved, I drove from Alaska, so a nice quick trip down, and I came with a love for storytelling, so I couldn't be more excited to be here and working with Mudroom and talking to you guys tonight. As Bente alluded to, I wanted to say thank you to Pan, who provided the delicious food tonight, and thank you to... And thank you to Chicken Slacks, who is providing the music tonight. And thank you guys for coming. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the storytellers. Our first storyteller is going to be Viki Bridge. Viki enjoys gardening in Newport and is an ardent poodle lover. And she is the first storyteller who broke international rules. Please welcome Viki.
So you see in my bio, I'm a traveler. And it was in 1985 at the tender age of 24. Am I loud enough? Yeah, okay. At the tender age of 24 that I went on my first adventure to Nairobi, of all places, the first place to pick. A friend of a friend had a house there and invited me to come down to visit. Oh, yeah, that'd be great. And it was like a week or two before the trip, and I called her, and she said, "Oh, I'm not going." And I already had my ticket and my passport and my shots, and I had broken off my engagement, and so I went anyway. And it worked out fine. I got a temp job in Nairobi. I went on a little safari. I got held up at gunpoint by a drunk police officer. And then through connections and opportunities, I spent some time in Mumbai. I won't go back to Mumbai. It was really sad. I got slapped around by a group of teenage girls. That wasn't good. Spent some time in Bangkok. Best banana pancakes ever. And then ended up in Taiwan, penniless. I had maybe $50, kind of desperate for work. I even I worked as a movie extra one night and danced to the Tennessee Waltz when she was playing that. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. I did that too. But 1985 was a great time to be an expat in Taiwan. It was the beginning of their tech explosion. The personal computer was just, rolling out, and Taiwan was ready for it. And so there were lots of Chinese people who were desperate to learn English because they were trying to sell their computers in America. And so there were a lot of travelers, backpack travelers, headed to Taiwan to work in the bushibans, which were illegal English language schools. And really the only qualification for working in the bushiban and teaching English was being able to speak English passably. So I was living in a hostel in downtown Taipei. There were about 15 or 20 of us living in this hostel together and making really good money. Like we would make in an hour what a laborer would make in a day. And so we were doing a lot of partying, going out to the bars, going out to eat every night. And it was just a really fun time to be in Taiwan. The only problem was that every 3 months you have to leave the country to renew your tourist visa. And so I'd pop over to Hong Kong for a couple of days, Manila for a couple of days, back to Bangkok for a couple of days, but it was getting expensive. So when this guy that we knew came to the hostel and he said, "Hey, I got this deal. You can go to Seoul for a couple of days and you don't have to pay. It's free transportation to and from the airports. They pay your airfare, they pay your hotel room, and they give you a couple of bucks to spend while you're there." And I'm like, yay, that sounds like a perfect deal. And it's like, what do you have to do? And they said, you just have to carry this suitcase. Okay, what's in the suitcase? And they said, electronics. Electronics. What harm can electronics do, right? So, it was time for me to renew my visa. I called up the guy. I said, yeah, I got to go to Seoul. And so they picked me up at the hostel, drove me to the airport, handed me the suitcase and a bag of pine nuts. It was like a 2-pound bag of pine nuts. I'm like, pine nuts? Why pine nuts? Well, they're really popular in Korea and they can't get them there. Okay. And a pineapple. Well, what's the pineapple for? And they said, when you get to customs, you take your suitcase and you put it on a cart. You take your pine nuts and you put them in the top part of the cart and you put your pineapple there. And that's the signal. Someone will come and they will tell you which customs officer to go to. So I get to Korea, I get my suitcase and my pine nuts and my pineapple and my tiny little backpack. I was allowed to bring a little backpack. And the other thing we had to do is wear a Rolex watch, a fake Rolex. So I'm standing there, walking really slow towards customs, looking around, trying not to look suspicious, waiting for somebody to tell me where to go, really nervous. And this guy comes from the side. He's like, that one. I said, okay, roll over there, get in line. I'm thinking, this is not the shortest line, but, people are going to think, I don't know. So I'm in line, I'm waiting for my turn, I get up there, he looks at my stuff, yep, go. That was it. On the way out to the receiving area, and the guys who were supposed to meet me met me there, took the suitcase and the pine nuts and the pineapple and whatnot, took me to the hotel. I had a fun couple of days in Seoul. I went to the zoo, I went to the market, I had some really good fried bread, bought some cheap clothes. They picked me up, took me back to the airport, flew back to Taiwan. No problem. So 3 months later, I call the guy up again, and I'm like, guy, I got to go back to Seoul again. Same routine, same thing happened, easy as could be. Came back to Taiwan, all set. This is a good deal. This really works. And then getting ready for my next trip, we got word back at the hostel that our friend Nigel had been caught in Seoul. Nigel, kind of a nervous guy anyway, had put on the Rolex watch, but hadn't taken off his other watch. So he was so obvious, standing there with 2 watches on, hands shaking. Nigel got arrested. He spent 3 months in prison in Seoul and was deported to England, and we never heard from Nigel ever again. So apparently I broke some rule. I don't know which rule I broke, but I'm really, really glad I didn't get caught.
So I like to touch things. I know that doesn't sound good, and saying that to a room full of strangers probably isn't the best way to start a story, but it's true. And as Casey said, I am an explorer. I love to know if a closed door is locked. I need to know what's in that door. If there's a road, I'm going to take that road to see where it goes. And I will say it's hereditary, because my father is very much the same way. It's in our DNA. We're just a very curious people, and that's how we are. That's how we've always been. So a couple of years ago, I realized I've never really traveled. I want to start traveling, and I want to start seeing some new places because, again, curious, exploring, go out into the world. And I decided for my first trip, I wanted to go to Iceland. It seemed like a really great place to go, very friendly for a solo female traveler. People spoke English, and I thought I'd be able to get around and just have a really wonderful time and see some new things. So I hopped on a plane, flew to Iceland, and I started exploring. I mostly stayed in Reykjavik. I was in the city. It's a beautiful, walkable city if you've ever been there. And if you haven't, I fully encourage you to go. And I just walked around. And if I saw a museum that interested me, I'd pop into the museum. If I saw an art gallery, I would go in, or a cafe. And I just chatted with people and just had a really wonderful time. And as I was walking around, I came to this museum that I thought, this looks really interesting. It's a maritime museum. My father was in the Navy, and I thought, maybe I can find some great pictures of boats to send him. He'll really love that. So I go in, and I'm walking around the Maritime Museum, and I'm reading about the Cod Wars, which I hadn't known about, and looking at all these fantastic exhibits, and looking at all of these great things. And then something stopped me in my tracks. Something called an engine order telegraph. Now, if you're not familiar with what an engine order telegraph is, let me explain it to you because you have probably seen it on TV or in the movies. It stands about yay high, and it has a round face with orders on it that will say steam, full, half. And I see a lot of you nodding because now you know what I'm talking about, especially if you saw the movie Titanic. Yeah, it was featured pretty prominently in Titanic. So what the engine order telegraph does is it actually would give orders from the bridge, from the captain of the ship, down to the steam room to tell them how fast to go or how slow to go before the time of cell phones. You know, captain wouldn't have to text to the engine room and say, hey, slow it down a little bit, we're going too fast. So I saw this engine order telegraph, and it was made of brass, and it was the perfect height for me to stand up and just look at it. And then it had the little slide on the top, which of course I touched a little bit. You know, hey, again, I'm going to say too, it's a museum, but if you don't want me to touch things, put up signs. Ava Gallery has signs. Iceland, put up signs if you don't want me to touch things. That's all I'm going to say. So then the engine order telegraph also had on the bottom these two handles, which perfect for my little hand. So I grabbed it and I thought, oh, this is really fun. I like this. And then I started to pretend I was Walter Mitty. Now, if anyone has ever read The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber, one of my favorite short stories, it has been for about 25 years. And in the beginning of the story, Walter Mitty, who is this character with this huge imagination, he has this very drudge-filled life and a nagging wife. He's always imagining that he's something else and he's somewhere else. And the very first piece that he imagines is that he's this commander of the ship. And he's got all of these men under his control, and he's going through and he's getting them through the storm. And all of the men are thinking, okay, the commander, he's not afraid of anything. The old man's going to get us through. So that's who I was pretending. I was Walter Mitty. I was the commander, and I was getting these men through. And I'm holding the handles, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This feels great. So I thought, okay, time to go check out the rest of the museum. And as I stepped away from the engine order telegraph, in my hand came loose one of the handles. So I look at the telegraph, and I look at my hand, and I look at the telegraph, and then I start to hear footsteps of people walking around the museum. So I start frantically trying to screw it back in, and it's not going because the bolt just isn't fitting, and for some reason the bolt is stripped. Now, again, not my fault because maybe other people have touched it and it has fallen off. I don't have Gorilla Glue because Iceland TSA would have taken that away from me. I have nothing in my handbag that can help me, so I'm frantically trying to fit this in. People are walking by, and I'm just sort of palming it, like, hey, yeah, I love the museum, great museum. and wondering what to do with this piece that I'm holding. I'm not 100% positive. So it's not fitting on. All of these guests are walking by, and it dawns on me, maybe I should tell someone. And I thought, I should probably be honest, fess up. Hey, I kind of broke this. You know, can you fix it? Yes, it's probably $50,000. I can take out a small personal loan to help. That dawned on me for about half a second, but then I realized the day before, I'd stumbled into a wax museum, and it was the history of Iceland. And let me tell you, Iceland has a very bloody history. People in that museum were getting bludgeoned to death, burned at the stake, sawed in half, and I thought, the Icelanders seem really nice, but what if they throw me in prison? And I don't know what an Icelandic prison is going to look like, because if this is their history, I'm not 100% positive what that's going to look like. So eventually, I waited until no one else was around, and I took the handle, and I gently put it on top of the engine order telegraph, and I slowly backed away, because I have learned if you run away from something you've broken, you are clearly incriminating yourself. Don't run. Slowly back away, nonchalant, go take some pictures of other things, and then walk out. And I did check for cameras, and I did not see any. So that was the end. I sort of half expected to get caught at the airport. Thankfully, I did not. Flew home, and that was the end of that. I wasn't quite positive how I was going to end this story until about 2 weeks ago. I went over to my parents' house, and I was visiting, having coffee, and I told my mom I was doing Mudroom. And she said, "That's fun. What story are you telling?" And I said, "Oh, I'm telling a story about Iceland, about a maritime museum." Notice I did not tell my Baptist Italian mother. I was telling her about how I broke something in the museum. And she said, "Oh, your father and I had a wonderful visit to a maritime museum in Kingston, New York." And I said, "That sounds great, Mom." She said, "Let me show you pictures." So she whips out her iPad, and she then proceeds to show me pictures of my father walking through the maritime museum, touching everything. There's Dad clanging a bell. There's Dad with the spotlight. There's Dad with the steering wheel. And the last picture, the second to last picture, is my father with an engine order telegraph. And with my father with his hand on the engine order telegraph. And she goes and she swipes to the last picture. Still a picture of the engine order telegraph, but the picture has a blur in it. And the blur is my father running away because he has just broken the engine order telegraph. Thank you.
Looking back, I'm not sure if the fateful moment was when I called him an asshole or when he stuck his thumbs in the middle of my chest and started pushing me backward down the hill. But maybe I should back up for a moment. Back in the days when I probably should have been in college and sometimes was, my friends and I would make the same annual migration of so many other young people our age to the coast to work in beach towns for the summer. Our choice was the charming hamlet of Algonquin, Maine, perched on 3 miles of unbroken white sand on the edge of the uncaged Atlantic. Algonquin was and is a haven for all kinds of sea and sun-loving humanity. Families, French-Canadian families, a thriving, long-established gay community, and us, the young people with raging libidos who formed the backbone of the summer workforce. Our ringleader was Norm, who was charismatic and slightly abusive, like my country. He was the only one who got to have a first name. The rest of us were Walker, Alvarez, Davis. You get the idea. Oh, the women with whom we hung out with got to have first names too, but the only one you need to know about is Bobby, who was from Holton at the end of I-95. She was working as a waitress at Einstein's restaurant there in the center of town that summer. And she was going out with Norm, who treated her like a queen some of the time, and like no kind of royalty at all the rest. The truth is, the rest of us guys were a little bit in love with Bobby because she was kind and sweet and had this unlikely belief that all of us sunburned heirs to the patriarchy could somehow become better guys than we were. She was kind of like a den mother for wolves. We had rented half of a slightly run-down yellow-clapboard house just south of the center of town that quickly became notorious for high-volume socializing long into the night. So much so that not infrequently we opened the door to distinguished uninvited guests in blue uniforms. We partied at the Yellow House pretty much every night. But we liked to branch out a bit, so we were excited when we found out that August, an after-hours club had opened up just over the town line in York to take advantage of that town's more liberal laws about how late into night you could serve alcohol. And in a friendly gesture to their northern neighbor, they called themselves Good Night, Agunquit. We heard they were doing a really good business. Lots of people our age every night, so much so that they hired off-duty police officers to do crowd control. Now, we had developed a cordially conflictive relationship with our Agunquit police officers, but these would have been York cops, and we didn't know them at all. So on the night in question, when we decided to go check out Goodnight Agunquit, we pre-functioned a little bit at Bobby's apartment above Einstein's restaurant, and then we headed on foot down to the club. It was less than a mile away. We were all dressed in our summer clubbing best. I had a red and white striped button-down Oxford shirt and my blue running shorts and my white tennis shoes that spilled beach sand everywhere I went. I had stopped cutting my hair, I was trying to grow a mustache, and I dragged a razor across my chin maybe once a week. I looked kind of like a preppy gone bad. So we got to the driveway of Goodnight Agunquit that juts up steeply from Route 1, and we went up to where it leveled out into the parking lot. And we saw that indeed there was a crowd of people waiting to get carded to get in. But the first thing that happened was that Norm and Walker started abusing the rent-a-cop who was there doing crowd control, and with really intelligent things like, rent-a-cop, where'd you get that badge, and the cereal box, and other things like that. But he just kind of glowered and growled at us, and we went on by and got in line. And as I say, the line was long, so there was plenty of time for the anticipation to build. And every time a clump of person got carded and went in, the door would open and the disco lights would flash out and the music would pulse. And then more people would go in, the lights would flash, the music would pulse. And finally we got to the front of the line. Norm and Bobby got carded, they went in. Walker and Alvarez got carded, they went in. And then there was me. I had just turned 21, but I seemed to have left my ID back at the house. And the kid at the door said, "Sorry, man, if you don't have an ID, I can't let you in." So I said I understood and turned to go, but the cop that Norman Walker had made fun of, came running up and said, "Yeah, if you don't have an ID, get the hell out of here." So I brushed by him and called him the aforementioned name of a puckered hidden body part. And the next thing I knew, there was a beefy hand on my shoulder, and he spun me around and started pushing me backwards. And a grenade of rage went off in my head. How dare he touch me? And the next thing I knew, I had popped him in the chin with my right fist. And then, of course, the next words through my head were, "Oh my God, what have I done? I'm going to die." And the only thing I could think to do was I ducked down, grabbed him around the waist, and threw him up against a car. I had never been here before. I was making this up as I went along. So, of course, the other cop came along and grabbed me by the hair and the seat of the pants and bounced me over the gravel and threw me in the back of the squad car. And a couple hours later, I was bailed out by Bobby, the patient den mother, with some of her boss, Steve Einstein's money. And a few months after that, I finally went to trial and was convicted of simple assault and sentenced to 30 days in jail, all but 3 suspended. But the craziest thing about it was when I said, "Your Honor, I have a ticket to fly to France, and can I do my time when I get back?" And he let me. So I used to tell this story a lot, like in the years immediately after that, mostly after a couple of beers, to young white guys like myself with unformed frontal lobes to show what a badass I was. But the years went by and I stopped telling it. I guess I had other stories to tell. Maybe I started to grow up a little bit. But then, years later, another August rolled around. And I was standing in a circle with hands joined with 150 other people in a vigil in the memory of Mike Brown, the young unarmed black man who had been shot dead the day before in Ferguson, Missouri, for expressing his rage to a white police officer. And that day I started to tell the story again, but it had changed. It had become the story of an unbelievably lucky young white kid, of a kid who was mind-bogglingly clueless about his own privilege, but who, through no virtue of his own, fate and circumstance had allowed to survive his youthful expressions of rage, grow up, find love, have a daughter, and watch her grow up too. Blind fate and random circumstance.
You want to pick? This is for the story from the audience.
We promised the story from the audience, and we just want to encourage all of you to think of the stories you have to share.
It's really, you're a great audience, and it's so easy. It seems a little intimidating. It really is easy, and we encourage you to submit. Yes. Our next theme is family ties.
Yes. So if you have a story.
If you have a story about a relative that you've always wanted people to know about, tell us. We want to hear.
So, but today's audience story is, do you want to read it out? Chico. All right.
Woo!
Donna, could you make sure the cameras are framed up? I'm supposed to be manning the cameras, and my boss is here. So I could probably just end the story there. But I'll tell you something. Breaking the rules. So it was 2010. It was the summer of 2010. Croquet was hot. I'm not sure if you remember that, but a real popular amongst me and a very select group of friends. I had a cool truck, or my dad did, because I was a college dropout, trying to figure out what I was doing in my life with very little money. But it was a 1989 Ford F-150. The high beams were on the floor. You had to lock the wheels to put it in four-wheel drive. It was cool. The bumper fell off one day, and so we made a new bumper out of wood, and then whatever we attached the bumper to fell off, and then we just taped the license plate to the tailgate. But so it was summer, and I like swimming, so I was wearing my swim trunks, and I was going for a swim, and I'd been making my money by working at the Bagel Basement. Not sure if you remember the Bagel Basement. Yeah, but that was a great job to not give a shit about. You'd be there with your bagel and your Orangina that you'd taken, and the boss, who was a Tuck School graduate, would slink out of his office having done a pile of coke that he'd gotten from like what should have been your paycheck, and he'd look at you and he'd say, "Hey, did you pay for that?" And you'd be like, "Yeah." And then he'd slink off to like make sure that the baker who'd gotten tuberculosis wasn't going to the hospital so we wouldn't get shut down for a health code violation. And don't worry, we got shut down because we ran out of money. But so after work, I'd go off to hang out with my friends who also didn't have apartments. So we'd hang out at our friend Missy's because she left the door unlocked. And while she was at work, we would play croquet. And she was living at Renahead Meadows, which is behind the graveyard on Old Pine Tree Cemetery Road, but not the Old Pine Tree Cemetery Road of Old Pine Tree Cemetery Road namesake, the new Old Pine Tree Cemetery Road cemetery. Just to, give you a place marker. Some people call it Renahead Ghettos, which is a real kind thing to say about like other people's stable housing. But so it's a whole bunch of condos, and in the middle there's this common area, and we were real into playing croquet. We had, I think as a present, gotten Missy this croquet set from LL Bean, and it was made out of pine, and it would dent and break all the time, but since it was LL Bean, you could just return it. So once it got busted up, and I guess we just like break them and bring them back and be like, it broke! And then we'd get a new croquet set. And so we were playing, and we'd play all day, and then once it would get dark, we would go over to the graveyard next door, because there was this big spot that was illuminated with light, and there weren't any graves around. But so one night we went over there, and we jumped over the fence to get there, and we were playing croquet, and I was just about to become poison. I could go into the minutia of croquet, but I'm going to read the room here a little bit. And just tell you that poison is the best thing that can happen to you. And we'd been talking about, we were playing in the graveyard, and it's kind of suspicious at night. It's like, but we're not doing anything wrong. So if, like, the cops show up, let's just, explain to them what's going on. And so the cops showed up, and we ran in every direction. And I made it to the fence real quick, and I jumped over, but there was a cop on the other side, and he told me to get on the ground. And it'd been getting kind of cold out. I guess this maybe was later in the summer or something. I'm having a bit of hard time placing it. But so I had socks on my hands. And they brought me down to the apartments, and at that point I realized that not only did like a cop or two show up, but every single cop in the entire world had showed up. There was like 30 cruisers or something, and I was thinking to myself, it's like, I'm not going to rat out my friends. I'm going to be cool. I'm going to play it cool. I'm not going to say a thing. And they were like, why do you have socks on your hands? I was like, because my hands are cold. And they were like, because you're stealing dead bodies. And it took me a little bit to process that, but then I realized there had been a misunderstanding. And so I said, my friends are Justin Bendel and Lucas DeVries. And they said, we already got Justin. And they'd gotten him because they'd released the police dog, and police are faster than people. Dog's name was Max. But so then they cruised around for a while with their loudspeaker going, Lucas DeVries! And he'd been standing in the woods, and he still had his mallet, and he came out. He was like, that's me. And so we went to the police station, and they put us in a pen, and they pretty soon took me out. And I didn't have my ID. I had my swim trunks on. But they kind of figured me as the guy that's going to squeal, and I was. So they brought me to this little room. They were like, tell us what was going on. It's like, well, we were playing croquet, and I was about to become poisoned. And then you showed up, and we ran in different directions for no particular reason. And he was just like, great, all right. And he put us in his pen, and then the sergeant walked out, and he was holding Lucas's mallet. And he pointed at his hand, and he pointed at his head. He was like, you know what that is? I'm like, what? And he pointed at his head. It's like, what's this? It's like, your head? He's like, what's this? I'm like, your fist? Are you going to punch us in the face? He's like, no, what's this? I'm like, your hand? What's this? Your arm? No, these. What are these? He's like, knuckles. And I was like, what's this? Head. Oh, I get it. Knucklehead. We thought you were threatening us. But so we called the bail bondsman. They bailed us out. And then they decided to give us a ride home. I got to call shotgun in the cruiser. And there's literally a shotgun there. Had a good conversation with the police officer about, it had just been job shadow day. I'd seen some kids driving around in cars. He was real happy about that. And he was dropping us off, and just as a call was coming in, he was like, oh, I gotta take this. And we were like, you want us to go with you? You know? We're criminals. We think like them. And he gave it a pause. He was like, no, I can't do that. So we got off, and we came inside Missy's house, and we were like, Missy, guess what happened to us? We got arrested. And she called us idiots. And so then I got in my truck, and I was driving back home to Thetford, and I realized I was pretty much out of gas, so I stopped by Food Stop. Remember Food Stop? Yeah. And realized I didn't have my wallet. And I was like, oh, man, what am I going to do? How am I going to get home? And I was way on zero. The truck really sucked up gas. So I went behind Food Stop and found all their McNamara milk bottles that they were returning. And I brought in their own crate of McNamara milk bottles and returned it to them. Then they gave me money, and I gave the money back to them. I filled up my truck and went home. But so I spent the next few months worrying about, oh man, how much is this going to cost me? They had charged us with resisting arrest and loitering and prowling, which is, kind of intriguing. But eventually the day came for us to go to court, and we all put on our nice suits, and we went to court, and we were there, and we're like, what should we plead? We were like, are we guilty? I don't know. How does court work? We don't know. But so we thought we would just wing it, and they were going through alphabetical order, all the people, and so they called Justin Bendel, and he said, not guilty. And then Lucas DeVries, and he said, not guilty. And then they kept going, and the guy right before me stood up, he was like, I would like to talk to the council. And we were like, what? I didn't know that was an option. And so I said, I'll do that too. And this guy came over, and he flipped through some papers. He was like, we're just going to charge you with improper entrance to a graveyard. And it's like a $50 fine. And we're like, okay. And then my friends got up, and they were like, could we change our plea to guilty? The judge was like, sure. And so we had to wait there for a while, and people were getting up. It was like a DUI, domestic assault or something, and drug use, who knows. And eventually it got to us, and the prosecutor was reading the charges, and someone had called into the police that they'd seen 3 men at night go jump a fence into the graveyard with equipment. And so police were called, and they called in other stations, and the stations arrived, and the judge was kind of like leaning in, like, ooh, this is a good one. Like, I don't regret becoming a judge now. And he kept going, and the defendants ran, and the dog had to be let loose, and they were arrested, and it turned out they were just playing croquet, was how it ended, like, full stop. And the judge started laughing and laughing and laughing. And then he looked out across the audience, much like tonight, and he said, if the rest of you had a hobby like these three young men, you wouldn't be here today. And that's my story. Thank you.
So I was adopted at birth by a man that never really seemed all that interested in having kids, and a woman who had no business parenting anybody, but certainly not a daughter. So although I always knew that I was adopted, I don't remember thinking very often about my biological parents. I am a survivor of pretty extreme trauma. And so, like most trauma survivors that I know, I was really certain that what happened was my fault, and that there was something inherently wrong with me that made these people that should have been caring for me treat me so terribly. And so, on some level, I thought that maybe my biological parents knew that. Maybe they saw this inherent wrongness in me, and so that's why they didn't keep me. But the family that I was growing up in was also just really, really confusing beyond the obvious because they were really, really obsessed with appearance. And so there was all this crazy stuff happening at home, but when we were out in the world, we were put together, we had smiles on our faces, and I always got straight A's, and I knew what my job was as a member of this family, and it was to put my best foot forward. And so that was my out in the world person. And that was kind of what my parents were like in the world too. But then at home, obviously there was the aforementioned abuse, and also just, they just weren't nice people. There was just a lot of racism and homophobia, and just what I heard about the world beyond what was happening to me was just hateful. And so I worked hard to just try to figure out how to navigate this insane environment. And I guess in some ways it's not surprising that it took a pretty huge toll. I coped with a lot of eating disorder behaviors and substance abuse, and luckily, when I went away to college, I had a really, really strong group of friends, very supportive, and they finally sort of intervened with me and said, you deserve to not be in so much pain, and we want you to get help. And so my parents certainly did not condone this, but they didn't stand in my way. And I went to this treatment center. It's a women's-only treatment center. And it was the very first time that I had met other people that had been through the kind of thing that I had been through. And it's very different when you look at other people. It was really easy as a really scared, traumatized kid to blame myself. But when you're looking at someone else and you see that they're, just an innocent person, and it also happened this one particular time that a lot of the people I was in treatment with happened to be lesbians. And so I was very not at all considering my own sexual identity at this point because I had way too many other things going on. But I knew lesbians were really bad. I had gotten that memo. And so all of a sudden I met these women, and they were lovely. They were strong and brave and courageous, and it was this enormous aha for me that my family was wrong. And somehow seeing that let me see that they were wrong about all these other things. And somehow that opened the door. And fairly quickly after that, I did come out myself. And that even more so made me go, wait a minute, there's just feelings. You just love who you love. There's nothing wrong with that. No one can tell you that what you're feeling is not accurate. And so I became really determined that I was going to heal from all of these things that had happened to me. And I wanted so, so much to be a mom. I always wanted to be a mom. And I wanted to be pregnant. I wanted that experience, but I also just really wanted the chance to give a child what I hadn't had. And I fell in love with this woman, and we got married. She's my ex-wife now, but she is also my best friend. And she came from a family with a lot of adoption in it as well. She is her parents' only biological child, and then her 3 sisters were all adopted. And so she felt really strongly that she wanted to adopt all of her kids. And she wanted kids as badly as I did, but when we talked about it, I said, I need the first one. I need the chance to control what I can control. I get it that there's lots you can't control, but I need to know that my baby had enough kale in utero. And I was determined that so we compromised, and with the help of a dear friend, I did get pregnant, and we now have a totally delightful 17-year-old son. And I loved being pregnant with him as much as I knew I would, and I loved being his mom. We were sort of on our way as a family, and I felt like I was on my way to really leaving this horrible, traumatic past behind me. And we agreed that if we had other kids, it would be through adoption. But, I was in no hurry. I was the full-time at-home parent at that point, and I was just loving being with my baby. But life happens differently than you expect sometimes. And so when our son was just barely 2 years old, our niece came into foster care. She was 2 months old. And it just made sense for her to be with us. And so she moved in with us and then went back to her birth mom, and then she came back to us. And it was a really, really rough journey. Foster care is no joke. It's a really, really tough path, especially for the kids, of course. But for me, with this crazy trauma history, trying to bond with this baby that might stay with me but might not was such an unbelievably difficult task. And at the same time, she was a baby and I was a grown-up, and she needed me. And so I didn't know if she would stay. I didn't know if she'd be there for a year or a month or forever. But I just promised myself I am going to do the best that I can while this baby is here, because that's what she needs me to do. And it was a crazy 2.5 years, full of supervised visits and court dates and reunification plans and normal toddlerhood. And then finally, when she was 2.5, we got to the point where she was going to be able to stay with us forever. And she's now 15, and she is delightful too, every bit as much as her brother. And I'm from Vermont. I might even be the one who traveled the farthest. But anyway, Vermont's a small state, so when we were getting ready for adoption, the agency that we were assigned to handle our daughter's adoption was the same agency that I was adopted through, at that point, 36 years earlier. And so when we met with the adoption social worker, the final home study before court, this came up, and she was really excited. She was all like, "Oh, do you know about the Vermont Adoption Registry?" And she was really, wanted to talk to me about this a lot, and I wanted to talk about it not at all. I was really, I was tired. I was really tired. I had just been through this journey, and all I wanted was permanency and peace. And so, sort of to just get her onto another topic, I agreed to talk to someone from the adoption registry, and at which I did. And I definitely had long let go of the belief that my parents knew there was something wrong with me, and I was, for the most part, had worked through believing there was something wrong with me. But my quandary at that point, if I even contemplated my biological family, was what in the world would I tell them? Because presumably they gave me up wanting me to have a better life. And how do you tell someone that it didn't turn out so well? So I really felt on some level protective of them, but mostly I wanted just peace. And so I talked with this woman, and the way she explained it to me, to do the registry, you fill out your paperwork and you go into the database, and then if somebody from the biological family comes forward, they match you up. So any hesitance I had, at that point I was like, no way. Why on earth would I put myself through that? I felt like I had made it this far without knowing this piece of my story, and to say to myself, I want to open this door and have nobody come, was so much more than I thought I could handle. And so I hopefully graciously said, thanks, but no thanks. And maybe a month later, this woman called again, just randomly, and left a message on my voicemail that I deleted. And then she called a second time, and I deleted that too. And when she called the third time, she said, Hannah, I really think you want to call me back. I shouldn't be doing this, but there's been activity in your file. And that got my attention. So I called her back, and she said again, I'm really not allowed to do this. This information request came in, and I knew it was you, and I couldn't not call you, but I can't say anything else. You have to do the paperwork. And so I got in my car and went over and filled out all the paperwork. And she said, your biological parents have come forward looking for you. And it was clearly a really big deal that in her world, I didn't get it so much, but that usually parents that have had a baby as teenagers don't stay together. And so that my parents had stayed together, and it moved pretty quickly from then. But I remember the first email, there was a questionnaire that she had me fill out, and I remember reading through it, and one of the questions was marital status. And at first I just wrote divorced, and then I thought, no, I'm going to say civil union divorced, because then if there's this homophobia thing, we're just done, because I'd been there already, and I wanted, I figured if that's part of the path, then they don't have to come forward, but I'm not going there again. So, and then the other thing asked, something to the gist of what will your adoptive family think about this? And I had it had been decades at that point since I had seen anyone from my adoptive family. As I got strong and healthy, I left them behind. And but I was sort of like, oh, what do I say? I want to be honest. I don't want to overwhelm them. And so I said, not in the picture, not deceased, but that they had been unable to provide me with a safe home. And I felt like that was honest enough, but not too overwhelming. And so from there, we decided to meet in person. And the day that we met for the first time, My mom and I showed up dressed exactly the same from head to toe. And we went out to eat and promptly ordered the same food. And we put our timeline together and figured out that I have a biological uncle that was at a birthday party I was at in 1997. And we figured out that the day that my mom had called the agency to begin the process of searching for me was the day that I had relapsed with alcohol after 13 years of sobriety. But the really beautiful part of our reunification is when my mom and my dad and I walked into the very same courthouse and stood in front of the very same judge that had handled my daughter's adoption, and my parents adopted me back.
And can I share? Your parents are in the audience today. I think that deserves another round of applause. So when I was growing up, I had a bedroom on the second story and a fear of house fires. Now, my fear of house fires wasn't rooted in anything in particular, but if you go to enough elementary school assemblies with a man dressed in a fire dog costume telling you that you need a meeting place and an escape plan, that fear can start to seep in. So my brother and I made an escape plan, which was basically jump out one of my brother's windows. See, he had these lovely bushes below one of his windows, and that seemed soft, because out my windows, I had an asphalt driveway or a brick pathway and some paving stone steps. So I was supposed to go out into the hallway and into my brother's room, and we would jump out his window. But then I had a thought. What if the fire is in the hallway? The man dressed in the dog costume had told us you have to feel the door first, and if it's hot, then you're trapped in the fire. So obviously, I needed to be able to jump out my own window, and I needed to practice. Like the fire dog said, you gotta be prepared. So I started asking my mom if I could jump out my window. I didn't ask her all the time, but I asked her enough so that she would know that I really wanted it. She said no, every time. She clearly didn't understand, because I had a plan. I had this idea that I could jump out my window kind of sideways, and I would sail across the big pathway and the retaining wall made of cement, and I would land in my mom's strawberry patch. I would do a barrel roll to help with the landing, and then I would pop up and present like they do in the Olympics. But my mom never let me jump out the window, and the house never caught on fire, and I got a little bit older. But I didn't stop thinking about the window. I just started thinking about other reasons why you might jump out a window, namely, to sneak out. Now, I didn't really have anywhere to sneak out to. I wasn't getting invited to parties. I did not have a boyfriend, but I did have the questionable judgment you find so often in 16-year-olds. And that was really all I needed. I was a pretty straight-laced kid who just wanted to feel like a badass. So I invited my friend Danielle over for a sleepover, and we made preparations. We thought it might be a good idea to wear bike helmets while jumping out the window. You know, for safety. And the problem with this was that the bike helmets were downstairs in the garage next to the family room where my parents were watching Diagnosis Murder. And we wanted to avoid questions about why two teenage girls might need bike helmets in the middle of the night. It had been a little while since I had asked my mom if I could jump out the window, but I kind of thought the answer was still no. So we waited. We waited until my mom had gone to bed, and we waited until it was almost certain that my dad had fallen asleep in front of the TV waiting for Letterman to come on. And then I went downstairs, and I stood by the garage door. And it was one of those big, heavy, fireproof doors that squeaks loudly. And I pulled it open, and I stood frozen in the hallway, waiting to see if my dad would get up. but I could only hear noise from the TV, so I ran into the garage, I grabbed the bike helmets, and then I ran back upstairs. But when I got back upstairs and Danielle and I were looking out the window, the bike helmets started to feel inadequate. So we were looking out the window, and I had an idea. And I went into my closet, and I got out this long length of nylon rope. I had bought it a couple years earlier to use as a prop in live-action role-playing. You know, the kind with costumes and foam swords. And I think at this point, it's becoming obvious why I didn't have anything to sneak out and go do. But anyways, I had this rope, and I thought, wouldn't this be a great tool to help us climb out the window instead? So I tied it around one of the legs of my bed, and I gave it a couple tugs to see if it felt secure. And it did, but it also felt thin, and I wasn't sure if it would hold our weight or really even provide anything real for us to grab on to climb out the window. So we reevaluated again and came up with what we thought was the obvious solution that we couldn't believe we hadn't thought of originally, and that was to throw a bunch of bedding out the window and use it to cushion our fall. So we did that. I grabbed the comforter off my bed, got my pillows, the biggest stuffed animals we could find, and I just heaved them all out the window. And then, I climbed across the bed to look out, and I looked down, and it was 10 feet, probably 15, and the air felt cold, and I felt a wave of doubt. How hurt was I willing to get in the name of being a badass? And how much did I want to chase this particular childhood dream? The whole thing started to seem scary and more than a little stupid. So I pulled back out of the window just for a second, and I looked around my room for an excuse or maybe inspiration, and my eyes fell upon a stuffed animal we hadn't tossed out to cushion our fall. His name was Edison Wisewings. He was a small stuffed eagle. And he was one of those stuffed animals that talks when you squeeze him. And he would say, "My name is Edison Wisewings. Remember, my children, be grateful for what you have." Or he would just squeak like an eagle. And so I thought he would be perfect for some safety testing. So Danielle and I made a deal with each other, with fate, and with the universe. We would throw Edison Wisewings out the window first, and if he didn't go off, we would follow him down. So I grabbed Edison Wisewings, went back over to the window, and I hurled him out onto the cushioning below, and he was quiet. So that was it. We would jump. We were ready. And I knew that I had to go first. Second, if you count Edison Wisewings. It was my house, it was my window, and it was my stupid idea. So if it was all going to go wrong, I knew it had to go wrong for me first. So I put on my bike helmet, and I lay face down on the bed with my feet towards the window, and I started wiggling back out until my legs were all the way out the window, and I could feel the metal that clipped the storm drain in, poking into my stomach. And I didn't really know what to do next. I wasn't sure how to go from having my legs out the window to having my center of mass decidedly out the window. So I looked to Danielle, who was kneeling next to me on the bed. She had no tips. But the windowsill was really starting to hurt from where it dug into my stomach. So I figured it was now or never. I got a good grip on the inside of the frame, and I wiggled the rest of the way out until I was just hanging all the way out the window in the middle of the night in my frog pajamas. And then I let go, and I fell, and I could feel my feet hit the padding we had thrown down, and then the bricks beneath, and I was so grateful that I had jumped out the window and was back on the ground. I just let myself tumble back into all the bedding that I owned. And I looked up at the silhouette of Danielle in the window, and I told her it was fine. That we had come up with the perfect plan, and I had executed it flawlessly. So now, of course, Danielle had to follow. So she put on her bike helmet, and she followed me down, squawking more than Edison Wisewings in the process. And then we stood there for a minute, reveling in our triumph, and then we gathered up as much bedding we could carry, which wasn't all of it, And we walked back in the side door of the house. We went back through the garage, through the squeaky door, and dropped the bedding off and went back down, got the rest of the bedding, back through the squeaky door and upstairs. So I guess if I had really wanted to sneak out, I could have just walked out of the house.